The House Oversight Subcommittee on Corporate Subsidies and State Investments will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Cara.
Here.
Representatives Green.
Here.
Beerline.
Here.
Wagella. Here. Pohutsky.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 members present, a quorum.
Minority Vice Chair Wagella moves to approve the minutes of the March 12th meeting. Hearing no objection, they are approved. Today we are hearing a presentation from the MEDC. Thank you to the MEDC for a conversation that you've had and willingness to come in and testify today. If Kristen Armstrong and Josh Hunt will please come forward, look forward to your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for this opportunity to be here today and to provide some information on the mega tax credits. As you mentioned, my name is Josh Hunt with the MEDC, and I'm joined by Kristen Armstrong. And today, what we will do is provide some information on some of the following areas about the mega tax credits in terms of defining what a mega tax credit is, outlining the difference in refundable and non-refundable tax credits, explaining how mega tax credits are calculated, walking through the impact of the program since it was formed by the legislature in 1995, providing a timeline and history of the mega tax credit program, talking through the compliance process, and looking at past and future financial estimates for the program as well. And so, starting here with what mega tax credits are. The mega tax credit program was started in 1995 and established by the legislature and signed into law by Governor Engler at that time, and no new agreements were allowed or issued under the program after 2011. The program was established in 1995 as the state's response to interstate competition for business attraction and growth projects for the state to compete to land more job opportunities for their citizens. The program established a refundable tax credit against, at the time, the single business tax, which was then changed with the change in the tax system to the Michigan business tax. Several factors were considered when determining mega tax credits, including whether or not there was a definable project, so that was what type of job creation and investment was coming for a project, whether the state had a competitive or cost disadvantage compared to other states or locations where that project could locate, the level of local government and economic commitment from the project in addition to the state support. Oftentimes that would come in the form of a property tax abatement, whether or not the project would impact the state's economy in a positive way, and finally, the wages and health care that was provided by the company to support the project for good paying jobs. As I mentioned, the mega tax credit is a refundable tax credit that is a tax credit not paid for from general fund dollars. There are primarily 2 types of tax credits, a refundable and a non-refundable tax credit. In a non-refundable tax credit, a taxpayer's bill can be reduced to 0 as a result of that tax credit. In a refundable tax credit, like the mega tax credit and some other tax credit programs, the credits can reduce the tax liability below 0, which would result in a refund of any amount of the credit that exceeds the company's tax liability. It's important to note that within the mega tax credits, the credits can only be claimed after companies pay actual wages, and in the cases where healthcare costs are included, contribute to the actual healthcare costs for those employees. In addition to that requirement, companies must meet strict standards of compliance, which we'll talk in more detail later, in order to claim the credit. In addition to the overall concept of the refundable tax credit, there are several different types of mega tax credits that were available under the new program before new credits ended in 2011. First, all credits required companies to pay employees at least 150% of federal minimum wage, and there was the high tech credit, or the high wage tax credit, which was a component of the high tech credits, required paying at least 300% of federal minimum wage. As you can see here on the slide, a standard tax credit was one of the types of credits which required companies to create at least 50 new jobs in the first year of the credit. The high technology credit required companies to create at least 5 new jobs in the first year and 25 new jobs by the 5th year of the credit. Additionally, the company had to be focused on a primarily high technology activity, which was defined technologies within the statute. These included areas such as advanced manufacturing, advanced computing, engineering, and research and development. A subcomponent of the high technology credit was the high wage credit, which, as mentioned above, required 300% of federal minimum wage, and also required at least 5 jobs to be created in the first year and 25 new jobs by the 5th year of the credit. There was also a rural tax credit, which had those same 5 jobs in the first year and 25 new jobs over 5 years to be required. And those could only be for companies that met all other requirements of the standard tax credit program, but were located within a county with 90,000 residents or less. And finally, there was a retention tax credit that required major capital investment in the retention of existing Michigan employment, that required companies to retain at least 50 employees and invest at least $50,000 in capital expenditures per retained employee. I'll talk just a little bit here about the overall impact of the program. The program was effective in supporting projects that created and retained jobs in the state, including over 63,000 new jobs that were created, 184,000 actual jobs that were retained. And both of these are snapshots based on certified jobs that were reviewed through the compliance process within the MEDC. Additionally, over $52 billion of actual investment was secured as a result of projects that received mega tax credits. I also want to highlight the various impact on multiple different industries for the project, or for the program as well. The program supported a wide range of industries in addition to automotive manufacturing, to include non-auto manufacturing, professional services, research and development. As you can see on the slide, actual capital investment outpaced what was projected capital investment for the program, and it is important to note that companies only received credit on actual new jobs and actual retained jobs that were completed through the verification process. I talked a little bit at the beginning here about the program was started in 1995, as signed into law by Governor Engler, and ended with no new tax credits being issued after 2011. But I wanted to walk through some of the changes that took place over time throughout the life cycle of the mega tax credit program. As mentioned, it was created as a response to interstate competition for business attraction and growth projects. It was initially established as a job creation and investment program, and was later expanded to include job retention as well. The program spanned 3 administrations and multiple tax codes, as well as changing economic times and the impact of the Great Recession and what impact that had on the automotive industry and other industries, caused a significant level of investment needed under the program throughout the period of the Great Recession. The timeline provides just a high-level overview of some of the major items throughout that time after the 1995 program establishment, including in 2000, when the program was expanded to include high-tech and retention credits through Public Act 144 of 2000. In 2003, the program was amended to include additional credit types for distressed businesses had separate job creation requirements for rural businesses. In 2004, there was amendments made for companies with retention credits, subject to repayment terms for any agreements that were violated, modified the definition of rural counties, and made changes to investment requirements. In 2008, Public Act 110 and 111 of 2008 created the new retention credit formula, which allowed for retention credits based on the investment of at least $50,000 per employee for at least 50 jobs to be retained. In 2011, under Public Act 39 of 2011, ended the ability for new mega tax credit agreements. In 2012, the Michigan business tax was eliminated and replaced by the corporate income tax. In 2014 was the end of any mega tax credits that increased the value of the credit overall. And then in 2015 is when restructuring was done on automotive OEM mega credits to place caps and additional requirements on those mega credits. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, who's going to walk through some compliance and the overall financial information about the program.
Thanks, Josh, and good morning, members of the committee. My name is Kristen Armstrong. I am currently the Senior Vice President for Business Development Programs and Execution at the MEDC. Have had responsibility for our business compliance team since 2013. As Josh noted previously, the MEGA program was established in 1995 and awarded credits pretty steadily over the years, as shown on this table. On the graph, you can see in particular the effect of the 2008 changes to the statute that allowed for the global retention megas, with the Detroit 3 receiving approval for the original global retention mega tax credits when we were in the depths of the Great Recession. 2011 was the last year in which any new mega tax credits could be approved, as the Michigan business tax was repealed and replaced with a corporate income tax. The repeal of the MBT actually becomes fully effective on the date that the Secretary of State receives written notice from the Department of Treasury that the last certificated credit or any carry forward from a certificated credit has been claimed. So it is not technically repealed yet because we do have certificated credits on the books. Companies with mega tax credits and other certificated credits were required in their first tax year ending 12/31/2011 to make a choice between continuing under the MBT or electing to switch into the corporate income tax. With that election, they were committing to remain in one or the other tax filing until the end of their, if they elected to stay in the MBT until the expiration or exhaustion of their tax credit. Also in 2011, just of note, the Mega Board was abolished and the powers and duties of that board were transferred to the Michigan Strategic Fund, which is why you see the MSF now taking any actions relative to amendments on that board after 2012. There were some amendments to existing agreements after 2011, some of which increased the number of jobs that were eligible to be counted toward the credit. The last of those amendments to increase the head count was done in 2014, as you can see here. It's very small on the graph. I think you have these in your packets, but those last 4 years show increase in value based on head count increases. Amendments after 2014 were not to increase head counts. In 2015, as Josh noted, the MSF board approved amendments to the mega tax credit agreements with Ford, General Motors, and FCA. Those amendments set overall and annual caps on the amount the credits could claim over the term of the award. And the companies were also required to make some additional investment through those amendments. And finally, we added provisions around credit filing timelines and forecasting to add some additional predictability for ourselves as the state and the Department of Treasury. As you can see in this slide, we're entering the last years of this program, with the last tax credit set to expire in 2030. Our estimates are based on, these future estimates are based on the previously issued tax credits with adjustments using growth factors that were provided by Treasury to accommodate and recognize increases in labor costs and healthcare costs. The estimated number of credits under each tax year are those number of tax credits that could still be claimed for that tax year. You'll note in some of those earlier years that there are still companies that are eligible to submit their application for a tax credit that have not come in yet. So that's why you're seeing maybe a 0 in 2021 means that everybody who was eligible for a credit filed for their credit in 2021. The taxpayers tend to submit their tax credits really several months after the end of their tax year, and in some cases, a year or more after, as you can see there. Companies are able to amend their tax returns for up to 4 years, and so we see some of that cycling through when we're doing these credit applications. Go ahead. The MEDC compliance unit performs all monitoring and compliance functions for the mega tax credit program. The tax credits are subject to a very rigorous audit and verification process. Each company is required to satisfy the terms and conditions of their written agreement to earn the tax credit, and this includes, among other things, the maintenance of minimum number of base jobs, minimum hour worked by each position, minimum weekly wage requirements, for example. If the company does not meet those conditions, it does not earn the credit for that year. If it doesn't earn the credit for that year, it forgoes the credit and is not eligible to come back in and earn that credit in a later year. We don't add a year onto the end. They just lose that year. The companies are required to submit an annual tax credit application, and the compliance team conducts a random sample audit of the employee population. We review documentation including Social Security income tax withheld. We confirm which EIN is paying the employee. We confirm the city and state of residence, the hire, termination dates of employees, location of employment, and hours worked. In addition, for new and retained jobs, we review the Box 1 W-2 wages paid, as this information is necessary to calculate the value of the credit. And we cross-check this information against payroll registers and master payroll files. Certain of the mega agreements also include health benefits costs as eligible for the purpose of calculating the credit, and this value is determined based on the actual costs the company pays to provide health care less the employee's contribution toward health care costs. This is just meant to give you a visual example here of how we would calculate a tax credit. It is based on the personal income tax paid on the wages. Again, we confirm that using tax documentation for each of those employees. The tax credit amount is listed on a tax credit certificate that is signed by the Michigan Strategic Fund Manager and issued to the company, and that company then submits the tax credit certificate with its tax filings to Treasury. As noted previously, the credit is refundable, which means it can offset tax liability and result in a refund if there is credit in excess of any liability of the company. Copies of these tax credit certificates are provided to Treasury on a periodic basis, so they're able to account for the credits coming. The MEDC processes and procedures for the tax credit program, as well as other economic development programs it administers on behalf of the strategic fund, are subject to oversight by the Office of the Auditor General. The Office of the Auditor General last reviewed the MEGA program in 2017 and assessed the sufficiency of our procedures for approving annual tax credit certificates, and that report did conclude that we had a process sufficient to ensure that we were issuing correct tax credit certificates. And finally, in accordance with Section 10 of the MEGA Act, we do provide reports to both chambers of the legislature on October 1st of each year. Metrics in that report include, but are not limited to, the total amount of capital investment attracted, total number of actual new jobs created, or actual jobs retained by the tax credit recipients. Copies of those most recent reports are included in your packet today. And in addition to this general report, copies of the actual tax credit certificates that the Strategic Fund issues are provided to chairpersons of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee, the House Tax Policy Committee, and the directors of the House and Senate fiscal agencies as required under Section 10J of the MEGA Act on an annual basis. That really concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions that members of the committee might have.
Thank you both for coming in and for your testimony today. I'll ask the first question while I see it looks like a couple others are coming in here. My first question is, there are 10 companies who are still receiving the certificated credits, is that correct?
Yes.
And
yes.
could you list those 10 for us by
I
chance?
sure can, yep. So we have, when we say active, you have agreements, right, that have an expiration date. Some of the agreements on our list look like they're expired, and that's because we're still processing through some compliance. So I'm going to list off the companies that their agreement on paper has expired, but we are working through compliance processes still. So Dow Inc., Farmers Group Inc., Ford Motor Company, General Motors, Gentex Corporation, Graphic Packaging International, Hemlock Semiconductor Operations, Hyundai Kia America Technical Center, LG Energy Solution Michigan, PureFlex Inc., Stellantis. On our files, it's still referred to as FCA US LLC as the filing entity, and Exalt Energy LLC.
Okay, thank you. And if they are to receive these certificated credits, they have to pay the higher between the Michigan business tax and the corporate income tax. Is that correct?
No, they'll be filing under the Michigan
No
business
matter
tax.
what.
Yeah.
And that would be higher than the corporate income tax would be anyway, because that 0.8% of gross receipts makes them pay a higher initial tax. Is that correct?
I cannot answer a question on the percentage on the mega or the difference between the MVT versus the CIT and whether that would be a higher.
Okay, and if the committee wanted to see numbers as to what they pay in total taxes under the Michigan business tax, and then subtract from that number what they're receiving in certificated credits, is that something that MEDC would be able to provide for us?
So we do not have the company's tax information beyond their tax credit certificate amount. That's all handled by Treasury. We don't come into contact with their actual tax filings.
Okay, so
beyond the
Treasury should have that answer for us?
They should. Now, there's a statute that does prohibit sharing tax information, and so that would be something just to be mindful of as we're working through that process.
Is it true for the first few years of the mega credits that that information was shared a little bit more openly for the first 10, 15 years?
Yeah, and Josh can help me answer on the statute. When the statute was amended in 2008, there were some provisions put in there that restricted how those certificates could be shared.
And who put in those provisions?
The legislature at the time and the governor at the time.
It was a legislative action?
It was a statutory change to the Mega Act, I believe it was, that limited the information that we were eligible to share.
Okay, and I will turn it over.
We can provide that citation, though, to you, so you have those exact MCLs in front of you.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up with that.
And I will turn it over to Minority Vice Chair Wagella for our first question.
All right, so I have a bunch, but we'll start here. Thank you, by the way. I understand you're just doing your job today. So with the compliance component, I want to just curious how big the random sampling is and who double checks that work. And then in regards to the 2017 Auditor General's report, my understanding is part of that found observations kind of talking about how state law, and we were just talking about this a second ago, state law restricts the Michigan Strategic Fund Board and others from reporting some of the information. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, how do we actually verify and double check the random sampling, but also that the correct amount of credits are being distributed?
Sure. Yep. So we will sample 15% of the base, the retained and qualified new job employees, and it is a completely random sample. The company doesn't select that; we select that. And then, if there are any issues or irregularities on that, would expand our sample. But we start at a 15%.
And if I could have just some leeway here. So with new, like, how do you verify the new jobs? Is that like a list that the company is providing you? And how do you confirm that those are in fact new jobs and not retained jobs? And then secondarily, how do you measure retained jobs? I think we cited a significant number of retained jobs. I guess, how are we coming to that conclusion?
Sure. So a couple things there. The company submits an annual tax credit application for us that lists all the employees that they think make up either the base jobs or the new or retained jobs. We take that and we select from that a random sampling of employees to test in both the base population and the new or retained population. For those employees, we then go and seek out the information we need to confirm that they're working at the project location, what their hire dates were, to the point of is it a new job or not, or is it a retained job or not. And then we will also sample wage information. We will secure W-2 forms. We will secure payroll records, and we crosswalk through their various systems.
And does the AG's office in the state of Michigan have access to that same information?
Yeah, when the Auditor General comes in and looks at our files, they have access to those complete records.
Good to know. They had one more, but I will maybe come back to it later.
And next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I get some clarification? You listed Dow. I thought they gave theirs back or stopped collecting or however you want to call it.
That is correct. Yeah, as part of their project that was taken to the Michigan Strategic Fund Board over the summer, a condition of that was effective tax year 2025. They would forego the remaining years of that tax credit. So we are still finalizing the critical industry program grant agreements with them right now. Once we execute that, or coincident with execution of that document, we will execute a termination of the MEGA.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question has to do, you have the MEGA's impact slide and it lists all the jobs and retained private investment. What is the total number of credit issued to go with all of these numbers?
Yes. The total, you mean the total estimated value of the credits? Find the right
Correct.
document.
So we have the actual jobs created, jobs retained, actual total private investment, but what is the mega credit total that goes with
Yeah.
those numbers?
So you're looking for the total amount of tax credits issued to date? Yeah, sorry, let me just flip through my papers here. Yeah, we report, I believe, value of certificates issued. So this is in the certificated credit report. I think this should be in your packet. It's the report that has a November 1st date on it. You can see on the fourth column down, the value of certificates issued at the bottom there, $6.3 billion worth of credits since the beginning of the program. Yeah.
To that point, I would say they are paying more under the Michigan business tax than had they paid under the CIT. So I understand they're getting these certificated credits, but I am very interested to know, are they paying billions of dollars more in additional taxes before capturing back these certificated credits? And I think that would be very valuable information for the committee to know. I largely believe that we should just be treating all businesses equally is a general philosophy that I have. But is it possible that some of these companies, once they file under the Michigan business tax and then receive their certificated credit, that they actually pay more than had they just filed under the CIT?
Yeah, we, as Kristen mentioned, we do not receive their actual tax, the taxes that they pay into the MBT for this. It's possible, but what we are going through is the compliance process for that tax credit based on the requirements of the credit itself.
Okay, and then one other question here is, I saw in your presentation you said that the refundable credit can reduce beyond zero such that the taxpayer receives a refund of an excess credit. So they can go to like a net negative on taxes paid for an individual in some circumstances, or can you clarify that further?
Yeah, so what that means is that whatever their amount of taxes that they pay under the Michigan business tax, if the tax credit amount exceeds the tax liability, they would receive a refund from the Treasury on that.
For the difference.
For the difference.
Okay, thank you. And next question from Representative Pahutsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had two questions. One of them is just clarifying something that Rep. Bierlein mentioned. For the mega credit that Dow is no longer going to be receiving, did they agree to no longer receive that, or is that somehow contested at this point?
Nope, that was a mutual termination.
Great, thank you. And then you had also, this might be a silly question, but this is not my strong suit. You had mentioned that recipients can go back and amend their taxes and potentially receive a credit in a future year. What are some reasons that they might amend those filings?
I mean, the companies would probably have to speak to that better than I could because I don't do taxes for corporations, but I think they're large, complex organizations. In a lot of cases, they've got subsidiary filers, that are all having to roll up. And so I think it wouldn't be uncommon that there are things they need to handle through that process later. Now, in our process is very long to go through an audit as well of the tax credit certificate, and sometimes you have to file your taxes, right? And then our process may not catch up to that, and so there may be a need where they have to amend later to reflect the credit.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said in your presentation, some of those amendments were made after 2011, correct?
Correct.
Was that a legislative decision or MED decision, or who's the authority who allowed that amendment?
Yep. So prior to the executive order that abolished the mega board, it was the mega board that could have authorized an amendment to a mega. Once those powers were transferred to the strategic fund board, it was the Michigan Strategic Fund Board that had the authority to approve those amendments.
And that was all within the confines of the legislation that was put in place to do it. So were not amendments to the statute, it was amendments to specific agreements with companies that had mega tax credits.
Okay, thank you. And another question from Representative Wagella.
Yeah, kind of coming back to earlier, had a chance to organize my thoughts. So the sampling's 15%. What's the threshold for the company to pass sampling?
I'm not sure I understand.
Do they all need to be?
So like what
Does
what-
100% of that sample
right.
have to be accurate?
Does it have to be
Yes.
100%? Okay,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
good to know. And what happens when companies don't pass sampling?
Then they don't get the credit, right? If we can't confirm that the jobs meet the requirements of their agreement or that the company has satisfied the conditions, they do not get a credit for that year.
There's no like second bite at the sampling apple? Okay.
No, we
And-
would issue, like, there would be a kind of formal closing out of the process, and they have to sign off and acknowledge that when we go through and complete that process.
Then on that same note, again, back to this idea of retained jobs, right? So how do we determine what jobs are retained and from when, right? Is it just just throughout the course of the history of the company? And how do we, because like we see all the time, a lot of these mega companies, GM, et cetera, cutting jobs all the time. So how can we realistically argue that this program is retaining jobs with the credits? How do you prove that?
Yeah, thank you. I can start with that, kind of generally how the retained jobs work, and then if Kristen has anything to add from a compliance standpoint on it. The retained jobs, we establish what's called a base employment level, which is essentially level of employees that was there working for the company at the time that the credit was first issued or the incentive was first awarded. From there are requirements for companies to, all different depending on the company's individual credit, number of employees that they must keep in the state. That keeping the employees in the state and meeting those investment requirements to show that they're continuing to invest in the business, those employees must be in excess of whatever that base employment or minimum employment threshold was established at the time that the credit was awarded.
So if I was a corporation that had a base employment back in 1995, it's now 30 years in the future, I just have to maintain the same level of jobs I had at that point?
Well, there are not any credits that were awarded in 1995 that are still in effect on that, but you would have to maintain at least whatever the job number is that is within the tax credit agreement that was established.
What's
for
the
that
oldest?
project.
What's the oldest credit that we have right now? Like how far back?
2008.
Yeah, each of the agreements, we're happy to provide copies of all the tax credit agreements if you want some light reading. But each one of them specifies minimum number of jobs, maximum number of jobs, wage requirements, and hour worked requirements.
Companies grow and shrink all the time, and so how can we guarantee that these companies didn't just have those jobs and would have anyway, and we're just adding to their profit margins?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, companies do grow and shrink, and there's an evolution within the economy, and that's why we will see an ebb and flow of employment numbers that are in the state. And so a couple of things that I would note on this was, first, if we're looking at it specifically from the retention credit component, is that companies needed to invest in their facility in terms of capital expenditures, at least $50,000 per retained job. That shows they're continuing to meet some investment requirements within the state. The statute also outlines that at the time that the mega board, or after that, the MSF board, was considering any agreement, that those there was able to be a verification or consideration of what type of out-of-state competition, either a competitive or cost disadvantage that Michigan faced at that time. So there's a review of that as well. And so it's about evaluating those various considerations for the project and seeing the company continue to invest and meet those investment, wage, and job retention or creation requirements.
Next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. I'm looking at table 2 in the document from November 1st. Farmland preservation, is that separate money from other existing farmland preservation dollars? It's $1.5 million a year.
Yes, that's a
So that's a mega tax credit separate from like PA 116
it's
and
a
other.
separate certificated credit under the statute. This here is outlining. This document is outlining all the different what are called certificated credits, which are credits that still were in place, separate from the mega tax credit program.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then, if I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify too, on the, back to the slides on the future mega credits, from 2025 to 2030, the number, 365, 364, 255, those are potential credits that could be collected, if everybody that had the access to one was to collect.
That's correct. That is what we would estimate that to be the maximum amount of the credits that could be claimed that year.
Thank you.
Another question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
Sorry, I could probably go all day, but every chance I get, thank you, Chair. So on the highest level, my understanding is that the minimum amount that can be paid is 300% of federal minimum wage. That's like the highest minimum level?
Yeah, for standard and high technology credits, it was at least 150% of federal minimum wage, and for what was called a high wage credit, which was a different way companies could qualify, companies needed to pay a minimum of 300% of
Would you
federal
say
minimum wage.
most mega credits still in existence operate under that 300% threshold? Or less, I guess?
Most have the requirement of the 150 based on the category that they qualified under. We could look at the individual
So like
wage
GM, I
requirements.
just like
for
to
each-
use, I'm going to bully GM for a little bit, but would they be 150 or 300%?
The statutory requirement is 150%.
So that's $10.87 an hour is the math that I got on that, which is, I think, is that less than minimum wage in Michigan right now with the new laws? I think that it is. So essentially we're allowing them to get credits by paying employees, they obviously have to pay minimum wage here, but they could pay, there's really no threshold is the point I'm making. Is that?
Yeah, so I'll start with that. There's kind of two different factors on this. The first is I was outlining what the statute that was approved by the legislature at the time required individual agreements, including, you mentioned General Motors. Kristen can highlight the General Motors requirements specifically. Each individual requirement, the MEDC, the Mega Board, and the MSF set additional higher wage requirements on those projects, in line with your questioning there, right? To make sure that these are good paying jobs and that they are meeting those requirements. So Kristen can highlight the specifics, but I was referring only to the statutory number.
That's right. So one of the conditions in each of these is that they have to pay a minimum average weekly wage, and that is set within their agreement. So if you're using GM for the example, their tax filings right now required a minimum average weekly wage of $1,300 a week for that job to count towards calculation of the credit. So that's the floor wage they would have to pay for a job to count.
What do you know what that is on an hourly basis? I could do the math. I'm not sure.
I don't know it on an hourly basis.
It's 32.
Okay. And just out of how is that, since that's above statutory level, how is that MEDC and the Michigan Strategic Fund Board making those determinations? Because it seems like there's a ton of flexibility there.
So those were based on requirements that were set forth where additional considerations by the Mega Board in 2008 when this was first started, and then by the Michigan Strategic Fund Board could put additional requirements on a company. And the goal of this was in line with your understanding questioning there of the 150% statutory requirement, looking to ensure that we are keeping jobs that are higher paying than those minimum requirements. And so it is the Michigan Strategic Fund Board or its predecessor, the Mega Board, that would have that ability to put those additional requirements in the agreement.
Is there a cap on the maximum for an individual?
Yes, under in terms of the maximum, there's a maximum of what can be counted towards a credit. It's not a cap on what the wages are that an individual could be paid, but in terms of receiving credit, those are capped at $250,000 per employee. So for example, if there's someone within the company that makes more than $250,000, the company could only receive the mega tax credit on income taxes paid for the first $250,000 of that individual's salary.
Good, thank you. And another question from Representative Pohutsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What of the 10 companies, who has the highest mega credit, and how much is that per year at this point?
We can't speak to the actual every year because of the restrictions in the Revenue Act on disclosing the actual tax credit amounts, but the overall cap on the General Motors credit is probably the highest of them. I was just trying to find that in the agreement here, of all the credits. They've got, I think, the highest head count authorized, so the most that they could claim over the entire term, including credits issued as far back as 2008 would be $3.475 billion over 20 years. That's a 20-year credit.
Okay. When does their mega expire? And just want to make sure I understand, is that the figure you just gave is the most that they can get over the entire lifespan?
Correct. It's over the entire lifespan. The last tax year that they could seek a credit for is 2029.
Okay. When was the last time that they... You touched on this a little bit, and last week we heard from HFA too. Do we know when the last time they made an investment towards these mega credits was, and if so, how much the investment was?
They have met their investment requirements. They have continued to invest in some of their plants. I don't have the exact date of the last investment that they've made in the state, but they have made investments and continuing ongoing investments into their manufacturing facilities in the state. But General Motors, we will talk more directly about the specific ongoing investments that they are making in the state, but they do continue to invest.
But there are like required investments per the...
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in the last amendment to the General Motors mega credit, they agreed to an additional $3.5 billion of project investment beginning in the period of January 1st, 2019 through December 31st of 2029.
Great. Thank you.
And another question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
So I think I know the answer to this, but just want to make sure. So House Fiscal last week mentioned that this is estimated to cost the state of Michigan $9.4 billion over the course of the program's life, including things that we still have to pay out. So can corporations, the corporations that are claiming mega and already receiving this massive amount of taxpayer assistance, can those corporations still claim other tax incentives throughout the state as well?
Those companies can receive other incentives. They cannot receive incentives they cannot receive any incentive that is also being awarded for employees that are being awarded under the mega tax credit.
Okay, and then just a more pointed follow-up. I've been here for 2 years, been following for longer. I haven't seen the MEDC oppose a single tax cut or for any business or corporation. So I guess my question is it the MEDC's position that mega should continue as well as all of the other ones? It's just a lot of money, and I think the people of Michigan are essentially seeing their tax dollars being funneled through corporations to Wall Street, dividends, and shareholders. And I think the evidence is piling on that the jobs aren't really being created. At least this is what the Fourth Estate, the press, is telling us. And other things. And a little bit of my frustration's coming out here because, I represent communities where I'll go into people's homes and, they don't have enough money to fix the hole that's in their ceiling. And we're giving multi-billion-dollar corporations massive amounts of taxpayer dollars. And the MEDC is always in support of any tax cut that comes up, at least that I've seen since I've been here.
Yeah, I can start with this, and then if Kristen has anything to add on as well. First and foremost, it's important to note that any new mega credit, there have not been any new mega credits awarded since 2011, and no new mega credit that increased the liability or the estimated value of that credit since 2014. And so we are administering the program as set forth by the legislature to continue to honor those agreements and credits that are in place, but there's no new mega credits that are being awarded. Overall, the MEDC is focused on our strategy to support people, places, and projects with the understanding that we must continue to invest as a state in our talented workforce, invest in our communities and our main streets across the state, and invest in making sure that businesses can grow in the state, and that there are multiple different ways to do that, and that incentives are one of those tools that can be utilized to help support economic growth in the state.
The only pushback I'll have here is, we're making choices, right? We're deciding, are we going to invest in roads? Are we going to invest in schools? Are we going to replace lead line replacements? Or are we going to give corporations tax breaks and under an idea that that's going to return investment? I guess maybe there's more of a statement, not a question, but I guess, if we're talking about the whole picture, I've never seen MEDC weigh in on, hey, invest more in schools and roads, but I've seen them weigh in on, we need more and more tax cuts and credits for corporations. That's all I'm saying.
And I would just add that we do not feel like we need to sacrifice supporting, retaining, and growing jobs in the state, or sacrifice investments in roads. We believe we can collectively come together to make sure that we are able to find a way to do both and make the proper investments that are needed for the overall future of the state.
Is it correct to say that certificated credits have been used to retain jobs in Michigan?
Yes.
And is it safe to say that other states are also participating in this process, or similar concepts
Yes.
of giving incentives to businesses?
Yes.
And so that level of investment, is it safe to say that that's kind of like the famous economic quote, from each according to his needs to each according to his abilities?
No. I don't. You have to explain that question a little bit.
Small
for me.
businesses have to pay the full tax rate, and large corporations getting these special deals and being able to capture back some of these taxes, they're left in a position to where they have an advantage over other companies in our community. So it just seems like we're expecting the small businesses, because apparently they have a better opportunity for success, to retain their jobs, but we need these special deals to keep these bigger corporations. So to me, it just seems kind of aligned with the famous economics term. Am I missing something in that perspective?
What I would say is that we, as I mentioned to the vice chair's question as well, is that we are focused on all types of different support for the state's growth, whether that's tools to support small business, which we've continued to see the state invest in, its tools for the infrastructure across the state, or its various tools for incentives for businesses. First of all, I think I'd continue to reiterate that this was a program where there have been no new deals that were established since 2011, and the MEDC is following those agreements based on the statute that was put in place by the legislature and signed into law by previous governors. And we are committed to that and approach that I mentioned in terms of investing in infrastructure and retaining and growing jobs in the state, as well as an and approach to see our large corporate employers in the state and our small businesses continue to succeed as well.
Well, I believe in the idea of fair and honest trade, and I would say that from an honest perspective, what the OAG said is that your 15% check, your random check, has come out reasonably. I certainly appreciate and can be charitable in terms of, I wish we could see it. I wish we could see those numbers, but we just have to take your word for it and trust that that random sample is sufficient. Perhaps we can get some more information from Treasury. So from a fair and honest perspective, it's missing the transparency end of that honest component. I would like to see that transparency end. But from the fair end, if we have to fund other operations within government and small businesses are expected to pay full tax rates, but large corporations aren't putting in those full tax rates, to me, I think it's missing and lacking on that fair end of having that equal opportunity for businesses in our state. And then other businesses and other taxpayers of other companies are left on the hook to make up for that budgetary shortfall, because these few companies, these few big corporations have been able to capture those credits back to their company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand the question on that, and that's why we are focused on various tools that support companies of all sizes and support investing not only in business growth opportunities, but investing in our communities and our talented workforce as well.
Okay. One last question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
So this just clicked for me, and the mega credit program was essentially revised in 2008, correct? Was that because in 2008 we had a recession and had massive job losses for these corporations? So that was done in an effort to allow them to keep retaining the credits, because part of the credits were created in the promise that they would retain jobs. So forgive me for this, but essentially what that to me is saying is that they didn't retain the jobs, and we continued to give them the credits anyway because we restructured them so that they could just keep getting mega credits. Is that a fair assessment of that?
I'd say it's a fair assessment to say that the legislation was amended by, the statute was amended by the legislature in 2008. It was signed by the governor in 2008, and the MEDC, and at the time the mega board, honored the program that was put in place by the legislature and those previous governors. It is also important to go back and remember the economic situation that not only the state, but that the country and frankly the globe were facing at that time, and the significant challenges for our workforce to be able to find employment, and for the companies in the state to be able to make investments. And so the mega tax credits were one of the tools that were utilized at that time in the depths of the Great Recession, and to establish guidelines based on the statute that was in place to secure those jobs and investment in the state.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, I think short memories we have, but there was also the federal bailout, right? Essentially, I mean, it's just interesting to me that the program essentially failed, and then we kept it going anyway, right? Because they didn't retain the jobs in 2008, so then we decided, okay, well, let's make new thresholds so we can reestablish. That's the way I'm looking at that.
The way I look at it is that overall, the mega credit program has achieved what it was intended to do, to see job growth and job retention in the state.
Well, thank you, Kristen and Josh, for coming in and for your testimony today. We are going to now call up from the Michigan Manufacturers Association, Mike Johnston. If you will come take the stage when you get a chance, look forward to your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to share our views on the importance of economic development in this state. I'm Mike Johnston, Executive Vice President of Government Affairs and Workforce Development for the Michigan Manufacturers Association. MMA represents companies in the largest sector of the Michigan economy, contributing $111.2 billion to this state economy. Manufacturers employ 610,800 people in this state, with an average annual compensation of $92,439. Manufacturing exports $62 billion in goods every year, bringing those dollars back to Michigan. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about our shared goals of growing the number of jobs and people in this state, and retaining and attracting new manufacturing investment to help sustain communities. I'll start with a little history. The MEDC covered some of it, but I'll give my perspective on that. Governor Engler was a conservative governor who did not like economic development incentives. Then a couple of large plants with lots of employees were attracted to move to another state. He quickly pivoted in 1995 with the intent of creating the best incentive program in the nation. He created MEGA, which then successfully beat other states for over a decade. In the Great Recession, when the national economy was shrinking, companies were consolidating, the legislature voted nearly unanimously to modify MEGA to successfully ensure companies consolidated here in Michigan rather than in some other state. In many ways, MEGA saved the state. In general terms, economic growth comes from both inside of Michigan and outside of Michigan. Retaining existing companies is critical to any growth strategy. If the new growth in existing companies doesn't happen in Michigan, the new expansion could take the existing production with it, reducing our manufacturing base. On attracting from outside of Michigan, if the state doesn't work to attract new investment, new growth is limited only to growth from the existing base. Every other state is working hard to attract investments from around the country and around the world. The chance Michigan wins new jobs from new transformational investment from outside the state without proactive incentives is very low. Successful economic development programs have two necessary components. The first is a competitive business climate. That means a state must have a competitive business tax rate, property taxes, regulatory environment, employment policies such as unemployment insurance rates and workers' comp insurance rates, energy rates, and trained workforce. Michigan has room to improve on all these areas. If we look just at taxes, many states have lower corporate income taxes than Michigan, which is ranked 26th. Half of the states are lower. 12 states have a CIT rate lower than 5%. 2 states have no business tax at all. A competitive business climate is necessary, but not sufficient to achieve growth. The state must also compete in the free market between states to retain and attract transformational capital investment and new jobs. Many states have a better business climate, but every state also offers economic development incentives. Indiana, a border state, has a 4.95% CIT and offers economic development incentives. Every state wants our manufacturing base because they are very aware of the high economic multiplier effects associated with manufacturers. If we think about the auto industry, cars have about 30,000 parts, and the supply chain tends to be located close to those assembly plants. The Center for Automotive Research reported that the economic multiplier effect in the auto industry, in the auto value chain, is 7.6. Meaning for every job in an assembly facility, 7.6 direct and indirect jobs are created down the supply chain. That's why other states want our manufacturing base. It's an economic multiplier effect that isn't generated by other sectors of the economy. Some ask whether there is a return on investment in economic development incentives. The answer is absolutely. Here is some math in a hypothetical company. Say a company agrees to create and retain 30,000 jobs in this state and not do so in another state with an average wage and health care benefits of, say, $80,000. That company delivers 30,000 times $80,000 or $2.4 billion in wages and value to the state every year. Communities are built by people with incomes. Those wages are spent in communities buying homes, going to restaurants, grocery stores, resale shops, etc. The company is also required to make and retain capital investments equal to $50,000 per employee. And in this scenario, that would be a minimum of $1.5 billion in capital investment. In exchange for all these community-creating jobs and capital investment, the state agrees to allow a tax capture of 4.25% of the wages and health care paid. That's 4.25% times $2.4 billion, or just $102 million each year. That's millions to billions. That is a remarkable return of investment for the state. I wish I had that kind of return in my 401k. To put the state's investment into perspective, the state would not have any revenue if that investment was made in some other state and not in Michigan. Other companies, offering companies a small portion of the benefits they agree to bring to this state is a very cost-effective and accountable way to attract and retain transformational investment. A company is only awarded an incentive for jobs it actually creates or retains. This is one analysis of a tax capture mechanism. But what is the best form of economic development incentives? The answer is whatever the state of the art is in the free market between states. Whether it's a tax capture, a cash incentive, job training, site readiness, local infrastructure, housing, childcare, the goal is to continue to compete with other states to win as the standard over time changes in the marketplace between states. The question for states should be, what is the most effective strategy to win high economic development multiplier effect projects? We believe manufacturing is the best target because manufacturing companies build communities and draw dollars into the state by exporting goods outside the state to bring dollars in from around the world. In closing, Mr. Chair, MMA shares your goal of increasing investment in the state and growing the number of jobs with good paying jobs and benefits to support families and communities across the state. The future of the state depends on an effective economic development strategy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Mike, for your testimony. And I do like the conclusion there that you do share my interest in seeing a good economy here in the state of Michigan. You did mention a 4.95% CIT from our neighbors in Indiana. And as I imagine, you could believe that I am one of the best allies you could hope for in terms of lower taxes across the board for anybody. I'll fight that fight for you any day to lower it to 4.95%, or even lower. But my question for you would be, would that be something that you think these businesses who are getting this economic development would support, is if we could just lower the taxes unilaterally for everybody and have a business-friendly environment where the big corporations and the small businesses and all employers could have an opportunity to pay lower taxes?
As I've said, we have to lower our taxes and improve Michigan's business climate. We absolutely have to do that. But what I would say is just doing that alone does not achieve economic growth, because you need investment from other states. And in fact, other states are actively recruiting our manufacturing base every day because they have as good a business climate or better than Michigan, and they have economic development incentives. So if we aren't competing in the free market between states, we're going to lose capital investment here in the state, because where's the best place to go when you have a good business climate and an economic development?
We'll come back to that soon. I'll let a couple of people get their questions in first. We'll start with Vice Chair Green.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Johnston, for coming and giving testimony. And I remember 2009, and it was a very dark time. I mean, lots of people lost their jobs, their homes. It was 16 years ago. I actually just had a baby, and my parents had to move because they lost everything, their retirement. And so I understand that we were very desperate, and we did need to save our state. However, we are now 16 years later. Our economy is a much stronger, and there is this push now to make it fair for everyone. And I was doing some research, and I found that General Motors in particular amended their mega tax credit. We're 6 times. 6 times. So every 6 times the goalpost kept getting moved, kept getting altered. And I guess that's where we're trying to decide how to make this more fair to everybody. But then we also, I've done research as well, and looking on, and this is on a siteselectiongroup.com, the total economic incentives awarded between 2018 and 23. So far away from that 2009 date, Michigan had the top, far exceeding everybody else, to 2,663 is the number, and I think that's in like billions, compared to then South Carolina, which was 1,617. And I can share this graphic. So we are double the economic incentives to the next person, which is South Carolina, which is not even close to us. When you look at our surrounding neighbors, Wisconsin is 115, and I'm trying to go through this, but we're offering significantly more incentives, and we're still kind of struggling. So it doesn't seem like the money is working the way it did as in 2009. And now we have other things that we need to take care of with infrastructure in the state of Michigan that we have to use tax monies to do that. I mean, I know we have a bill that we're potentially voting on today, and it's tough because those decisions were made 20 years ago, 16 years ago, but we're in a crisis now with our roads, with our water system, and we've got to find creative ways of paying for that without raising taxes. So do you have suggestions then or input? Have you had, have we come to the table on this, on how we can make taxation fair? We can also be competitive with the rest of the states and not using the tax dollars as we have, and still maintain our a business climate. I mean, do you have ideas about that?
Thank you, Representative Green. Really great question. First of all, I don't represent any one company, and so I won't respond to any one company. But if your question about, so we have more incentives, what we have? We have some of the largest companies in the world here in Michigan who have attracted an enormous supply base. And the auto industry itself is enormous, right? They employ hundreds of thousands of people, but the supply base around them is probably equal in size to them. And on your question of, are we giving a lot of incentives? Yes, you know why? We have a very large economy with very large companies delivering enormous amounts of jobs with very high wages. South Carolina is smaller because they're a smaller state and have not successfully yet attracted those companies. But if there's ever a day where we're not offering economic development incentives, South Carolina's incentives will begin to match what Michigan's look like today. So we can make a choice whether we want these hundreds of thousands of jobs that are very high paying, or we can say South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, North Carolina, go ahead and take them because we view them as expensive. I could refer back to the math. All we're doing is paying them 4.25% of the enormous value, both in wages, health care, and capital investment that are delivering here, in the billions. And we're only offering about $100 million. That's a staggering return on investment that every other state will be willing to offer.
Would you support giving that 4.25% certificated credit to all businesses in Michigan?
Absolutely. I mean, look, but what I would say, there's a difference between companies, right? They're not all created equal. Think if a big chunk of the manufacturing sector left Michigan, you can't replace that with fast food restaurants. Think about how, they don't pay the wages, they don't pay permanent jobs, they have a lot of part-time jobs. They're different. A small economy is in fact dependent on high wages with people that participate in local economies.
Next question from Representative Pahutsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is that when companies are reporting their requirements to receive the mega credits, there's an agreed upon number that they have to count up to. They may employ vastly more employees than what the agreed upon number is, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So what prevents those companies from effectually cherry picking which jobs they're going to report? So say that there's a corporation that may employ 100,000 employees, but they're only required to report, I don't know, say 34,500, just to pick a random number. What's to prevent them from only picking high wage earners with excellent health care benefits for that 34,500?
They have to report whatever they agreed upon with the MEDC. Mm-hmm. That's the deal. They have to report on almost all, I would say all these companies have grown in excess of what their obligations have been. So they agree at the time of the contract, what employees are retained, the base number that Josh talked about, and have to meet that obligation. And they are only reimbursed for what they agree to in the contract. If they're bringing in jobs in excess of the contract, they're not getting reimbursed for those jobs.
Sure.
It's,
but-
it's what they agreed to in the contract.
I mean, you and I are actually potentially getting close to making the same point, which the whole system may be a little flawed. So to the point that you made when you started, this is about trying to grow our economy and making sure that the workers of Michigan have a place to work and then to turn around and contribute back to the state. And that, according to you, is done through these corporations. But the system that we have in place could allow someone to lay off up to 20, 30% of their workforce, and they would still be able to turn around and claim these credits if they have enough employees that they're not required to report on, correct?
If they laid off below the threshold or what they agreed upon in terms of retained base, they would not get the credit. If they've grown in excess of what they've agreed to in the base, yeah, there's probably some variability in terms of the workforce.
But
That
for a
happens-
corporation like GM that has gone and amended their terms 6 times, we don't know whether or not they could potentially not be, I guess, meeting the spirit of what this program was intended, right? If they're potentially cherry picking employees to report on their wages and still have the ability to lay off that doesn't sound like a good retention program to me, if you can lay off 25% of your employees and still get these credits.
Yeah, I frankly don't know whether those amendments were because they grew jobs and wanted incentives for the growth of the jobs, or they reduced jobs. I straight up don't know. What I do know is if there was growth in this state and we have employees far in excess of what was here before, that growth is here because that plant is here, right? That facility is here, that infrastructure is here. GM could have made that decision to make that investment in another state, and we would have lost the value of those wages at $80,000 a clip contributed into the community. Yep. Fort Wayne, Indiana could be burgeoning as a result.
My point is, all those wages may not amount to $80,000 a year because they get to cherry pick which wages they're reporting.
They have to meet the terms of the contract. That's all I can say to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to dovetail off of what I believe is Representative Pohutsky's point is maybe if when they had their initial contract, if the plan was to keep blue collar workers, maybe a decent $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, middle income type of wage, and then you look at their compensation, if they can transfer those over to white collar jobs and receive a certificated credit up to $250,000, we don't have transparency to see that that's not happening, to where they are boosting their certificated credit value because they've transitioned over and said we retain that white collar job when the original intent was to retain the blue collar job. Is that getting to your point, Representative Pohutsky? And I understand that'd be a question probably for Treasury or MEDC's closer, but probably largely for Treasury to ask those questions. And I'll be interested to hopefully get those answers from them. I understand that that's not necessarily
No, it'd be good of you to get those numbers. My guess is the answer is probably different than what we all guess it is.
Yeah,
So-
it might be in between. Sure. And a couple more questions here. We will turn it over to Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
Thank you for coming before us. I think it's important for us to have these discussions in public. So first, just want to establish, can you just list some of the members of the Michigan Manufacturers Association? Tried to find this online, but I could not find a list somewhere.
Absolutely. So we represent some of the big iconic names that you would absolutely recognize: Ford, GM, Stellantis, Dow, Kellogg, all those kind of iconic companies. We also represent members down to 1 to 2 employees. 85% of our members have 100 employees or less. And one of the things we're very proud of, we think about the tool and die sector. It is the base of Michigan's manufacturing economy. We have the highest concentration of tool and die anywhere in the world. And if we don't have a manufacturing base, that tool and die base, which makes up, 85% of our members, 100 employees or less, big chunks in tool and die and other small family-owned manufacturers. That's all part of the supply chain.
Is it just fair to characterize that you represent largely corporations throughout the state of Michigan?
Large and small.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because what we're seeing across the country are record profits for corporations. I believe last quarter was actually the most profitable on record in U.S. history at, I think, $2.8 trillion. And GM in 2023 had, I think, $14.9 billion in profits, and the CEO is making $27.8 million a year. Meanwhile, people in the state of Michigan, and we're spending 2 times more than any other state in the union on incentives. Meanwhile, 40% of Michigan families are struggling to pay their bills. You've talked a lot about how this is a return on investment for the state. I don't know how that conclusion is being made, because every single person that I associate with and in my district are not seeing those benefits, but what they are seeing is that their tax dollars are going to some of the most profitable corporations that pay dividends to Wall Street shareholders, right? Like that's a reality of what's happening. And I'm a proud and open democratic socialist, but I can even see that the MEGA program is not a free market program. We're picking and choosing what corporations are getting benefits. Can you elaborate more on this return on investment argument?
Absolutely. Companies with high economic development multiplier effects will get economic development incentives. The question is, will they get them here or will they get them in some other state? So, we can say, hey, maybe we don't like these 30,000 jobs by a particular company, and maybe we are paying them too much to have them here. And if you stop doing that, I will tell you that capital is mobile. I don't, again, speak for any individual company and not making any claims about any action by any individual company. I'm talking about how economic development works in the free market competition between states. Every other state in the union will actively and aggressively go after those jobs. They want those jobs injecting that amount of wages and economic activity into their state. And the consequence, if Michigan doesn't fight for them, there is a risk that they will lose them. Michigan will lose those, communities will lose those amount of jobs, and small businesses will suffer because they don't have money. The grocery stores, the fast food restaurants, the coffee shops, they don't have customers there paying for the services they are providing.
So, like understanding the free market, doesn't it not be? It becomes not the free market when it's requiring state investment, because that's not the free market, right? That is the state investing in private corporations. And I would even add, when a bank invests or a company invests, they expect to see a return on investment in the form of interest. So cash payments back. So I would argue that if we're going to invest in states and corporations, we should essentially be receiving part ownership of those corporations and or cash payments back to us in return for our state investments.
Yeah, again, Michigan wouldn't have any dollars to give to companies at those not investments. All we're allowing to do is capture what they've, a very small portion of what they've delivered here. And other states will incentive. There is a free market. That 4.25% is an investment in the competition between states, in the free market between states. That's what that is. This is a fight between states for enormous capital and investments and jobs.
I think there's a great question about the free market from Minority Vice Chair Wagella. And this concept of free markets between states is an interesting concept to me in terms of saying that is what a free market is. I'd say the private sector is where the free market activity comes from. And before I turn it over to one last question, and then I have my concluding one, is do you believe that the wage disparity was higher in Michigan back in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s when we had a booming automotive industry? We were the manufacturing powerhouse of the world back in those decades, and obviously other countries have started to approach us in terms of manufacturing capabilities. Was the wage disparity higher between the top paid CEOs of the big corporations back then, or is it higher today to their lowest paid employee?
What I do know is there's been enormous global competition. I mean, in the 40s, there may have been 10 or 15 auto companies globally. Now there's over 100. I don't know the exact number. And many of those companies from around the world are now have plants in the United States, and almost all of them went to southern states with economic development incentives and better business climates than Michigan had.
Last question from Representative Bierlein before we turn it back over to me.
There we go. The light wouldn't come on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were on the same page, and then you lost me with state ownership. Mike, I don't know if you can really answer this question, and it's not. It feels like it's been kind of pick on GM day, and that's not the intent either. But as we talk about the mega credits and retention, I think it's really important to consider that we're only talking about retention of jobs under the direct umbrella of that company. So, like in my district alone, well, directly across the street from my district, we have a manufacturer that lost like 435 employees recently, like about 2 years ago, because GM chose to purchase parts from a company in Tennessee instead of here in Michigan. So as we're paying them to retain jobs, we're losing jobs by their direct action. And it's not I don't mean it to pick on GM. This is the example that I know. And they're big, and so everybody, we pick on the big guy. It feels like that's outside of the spirit of what this legislation and this program is supposed to do. It doesn't continue for a lot of more years. But if it is to continue, should those things be considered in this process?
I would say every company, whether they're receiving incentives or not, is in competition globally on the basis of price. Dick Dowk, the former head of American Axle, the founder of American Axle, former chairman of the MMA board a number of years ago, said manufacturing is different than other sectors of the economy. We're not, unlike retail and service, we compete with the lowest cost location anywhere in the world. And so if a company needs to find ways to lower their costs, and they found a company in Tennessee, which by the way has fairly low taxes and economic development incentives, and that company can produce parts, that supply company can produce parts cheaper than the company in Michigan, I think that's a lesson for Michigan. What was wrong with our business climate that Michigan company couldn't compete with the company in Tennessee? Because the challenge for every manufacturer and every business is, can we compete from our Michigan location or not? And if not, that company has two choices. It either closes or it moves to a state from where they can compete on the basis of price in the global economy.
Okay, so my last couple questions here is, you said that the Center for Automotive Research had that report with that 7.6 times multiplier. Could you share that study with
Happy to.
me and the rest of the committee? Perfect, thank you. And when I look at this, it seems to be making an assumption. Have you heard of the broken window fallacy by chance?
Oh, please educate me.
Well, the broken window fallacy largely says that if a hoodlum were to break a glass window of the baker, that creates an economic output because it creates a job for somebody to come in and fix that window. And then that money ends up having a multiplier as it created that job, and it stimulates the economy. But what it fails to see is that baker had a plan to go out and buy a new suit, which would have employed the tailor to create that suit and sell the suit to him. So in situation A, you just have a new window that replaced the old window that was arguably just as good before the hoodlum broke it. Situation B, you have both that window, which was perfectly fine before it was destroyed, and you now have the second output, which is the suit. And so when I look at this, creating jobs or retaining jobs concept, I feel that it's forgetting that those employees could have worked elsewhere and what trickle-down economic value could have happened had they not worked at that company. And when we are putting our resources as a state towards picking winners and losers, towards giving a special tax capturing profit margin, enhancing opportunity to big corporations that small businesses don't get, I feel like it's forgetting the economic value that all those small businesses could have enjoyed had they been able to pay lower taxes as well. Had there been a regulatory environment that was less restrictive, had there been lower rules, regulations, taxes, fines, and fees, and a business-friendly environment for everybody. And so I want to see those things in that equal opportunity. But does it make sense that it's possible that these economic studies are missing out on the concept of the broken window fallacy?
I think at the core of your story is the reality of the economic multiplier effect. Some companies have higher economic multiplier effects than others, and the goal of any economic development strategy ought to be to attract the ones with the highest economic multiplier effect. Again, cars have 30,000 parts, and that creates jobs all over the place up and down the economy. And then you talk about indirect jobs, people with wages begin to take that money and spend it in their community, such that if they didn't have that job, those small businesses wouldn't have any customers. So let's stay focused on economic development and
You
future
certainly,
economic growth.
you certainly see that, whether it's in the automotive industry, or you certainly see that glass that was repaired and the value for the guy who replaced the glass, but you missed out on the tailor is the problem with a lot of these economic studies, I believe. I think keeping it simple, looking at the basics of free markets and equal opportunity and what value that can provide is something that'll be fruitful as the state of Michigan determines the course of action moving forward. But I do appreciate your perspectives and the time that you took to come in here. So thank you to MMA and MEDC for your testimonies today. With no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.